Today, we're diving into the incredible story of the Supremes, a group that was quite literally built for success, a hit factory on overdrive, but a story that's also filled with some unbelievable heartbreak.
And that really brings us to the big question, right? How did three teenagers, literally from a housing project in Detroit, go on to become the most successful female group in the history of music? Well, let's get into it.
You know, our story doesn't start in a recording studio. It starts in 1950s Detroit, a city humming with the rhythm of the automotive assembly line. And that idea, that promise of industry, is key to everything.
It all began in the Brewster Douglas projects. That's where Florence Ballard, Mary Wilson, and Diana Ross first met. Now, there was this local guys group called the Primes. You probably know them better as the Temptations, and they needed a sister group. So Florence got the call. She grabbed her friend Mary, and Mary brought in Diana. For what felt like forever, they just hung around the Motown studio hoping for a break. Finally, in 1961, they got signed, and the name, Florence picked the Supremes from a list. The funny thing is, Diana and Mary hated it at first.
And this right here, this quote from Motown founder Berry Gordy, it tells you everything you need to know about his vision. See, he'd worked on an assembly line at Ford. He saw how you could take raw parts and build something incredible. He thought, why can't we do the same thing with music? He wasn't just trying to discover stars, he was going to manufacture them. The engine room of this whole factory was a program called Artist Development. Seriously, think of it like a finishing school for superstars. The whole point was to sand off any rough edges and create these incredibly polished, elegant performers who could play for anybody, anywhere. We're talking from the Apollo Theater all the way to Buckingham Palace. This was about creating crossover appeal and breaking down racial barriers with sheer talent and class.
So let's break down the assembly line. First stop, etiquette. Maxine Powell taught them how to walk, sit, and speak with grace, preparing them for the most elite venues. Then they went to choreography with Charlie Atkins, who created those signature, synchronized hand gestures and smooth moves. And finally, Maurice King would polish their onstage banter and perfect every single vocal harmony. Nothing, and I mean nothing, was left to chance.
And boy, did all that training pay off. What came next was a run of success that was just mind-blowing. They didn't just have hits, they became the actual sound of young America.
But it wasn't an overnight thing. For a few years, they were actually known around the Motown offices as the No-Hit Supremes. Ouch. The game changer? That's when Berry Gordy put them together with the legendary songwriting team Holland Dozier Holland. They heard Diana Ross's voice, that lighter, more commercial, pop-friendly sound, and knew that was the ticket to crossover stardom. And the result of that pairing? 12. 12 #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100. Just let that sink in for a second. That is a record for an American group that still stands today. The only act that had more was the Beatles. That's the league they were in.
I mean, just look at this list. It's ridiculous. Starting with Where Did Our Love Go in '64, it was just one after another. Baby Love, Stop, In the Name of Love, You Can't Hurry Love. It was a nonstop hit machine. They weren't just a band anymore. They were a full-blown cultural force.
And television took that cultural force and beamed it right into everyone's living rooms. They were on The Ed Sullivan Show 16 times. You have to understand, for a lot of white families in America back then, the Supremes were the first black people they ever really welcomed into their homes week after week. It was incredible entertainment, yeah, but it was also a quiet kind of revolution.
But that kind of fame, that kind of pressure, it comes at a cost. And behind the perfectly synchronized smiles and those sparkling sequined gowns, the whole dream was starting to crack.
At the heart of it all was this growing divide. On one side, you had Florence Ballard. Remember, she started the group. She had this big, powerful, soulful voice rooted in gospel. On the other side was Diana Ross, with a lighter, poppier sound that Berry Gordy believed was the key to mainstream white audiences. And as Gordy focused more and more on Diana, pushing her out front as the lead, Florence, the founder, was pushed further and further into the background. And then it happened. In July of 1967, right at the absolute peak of their fame, the unthinkable. Florence Ballard, struggling with the pressure and her new, diminished role, was fired. Fired from the very group she had put together.
What happened next is just one of the great tragedies in music history. Her solo career went nowhere. In fact, a clause in her contract actually stopped her from even mentioning she had been in the Supremes. Can you imagine? She sued Motown for royalties and lost. Eventually, she spiraled into poverty, supporting her 3 kids on welfare.
And then, in 1976, Florence Ballard died of a heart attack. She was only 32 years old. After Florence was out, the group was officially renamed Diana Ross and the Supremes. That was a pretty clear signal that Diana's solo career was next, and from there, the lineup became a revolving door of new members until the group finally called it quits in 1977. By the end, Mary Wilson was the only original member left.
So after all that, how do we remember this story today? Well, that's complicated too. It's sort of caught between this really famous, beloved fictional version and a much, much harsher reality.
You know, you'd think time might heal those wounds, but not really. The most famous example was at the Motown 25 TV special in 1983. There was this awkward on-stage shove between Diana and Mary that was so tense they actually had to edit it out of the final broadcast. It was proof that the heartbreak was still very, very real.
Now, a lot of people know this story through the musical and the movie Dreamgirls. And while it's definitely inspired by the Supremes, it's so important to know the difference. The biggest one? In Dreamgirls, the character based on Florence, Effie White, she gets this huge, triumphant comeback. In real life, Florence Ballard died young and in poverty. There was no Hollywood end.
But despite all the drama and tragedy, their legacy is just untouchable. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, of course. They basically wrote the blueprint for every single girl group that came after them, all the way up to Destiny's Child. And just last year, they received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, which was long, long overdue.
So what is the story of the Supremes when you really boil it down? Is it a story of triumph? Absolutely. Is it a story of tragedy? Without a doubt. Or is it maybe just the story of the incredibly high and often brutal cost of chasing the American dream? The truth is, it's all three, and that's what makes their music and their story so powerful and timeless.